Betty White, America's favorite grandma and Hollywood icon, has captured our hearts and made us realize that age is just a number. In a new book called How to Be Golden, author Paula Bernstein recounts Betty White's life story while teaching us a thing or two about living well.
That is what really fascinates me, that you ask anyone about Betty White and they jump up and down and are so excited to tell you, and everyone feels like they have a personal relationship with her. I think some of it is obviously the characters that she plays, in that she almost seems like she could be one of us if we were, incredibly talented and funny. She's not afraid to make fun of herself, which I think appeals to people. But really, the other thing is she's been around forever. She's going to be 100 in January. So pretty much, unless you're over 100 years old, you grew up with Betty White on your TV.
That is so true. Your book is set up with life lessons learned. What is the best advice you learned from Betty White?
I feel like, especially given I was writing this book during this really unusual, difficult year, I feel like I took a lot of lessons from her. And one of them is you sort of, if things don't go the way that you were planning, you got to pivot. And starting in early in her life, she wasn't afraid. If something wasn't going her way, she would just pivot. So for instance, her dream was to be a movie star. And early on, the studios, even though she's gorgeous, studios had a very set idea of what a starlet would look like, and she didn't fit that. But instead of going back home, which incidentally was Hollywood, she lived in, but instead of going back home, she was like, you know what, I'm going to figure something else out. And that's how she pursued radio. And then from that, anyway, I feel like it's so easy now to look back and say, well, she's had such a successful career. Why would she have any problems? But in fact, if you look at her career, she's been working steadily for so long. And obviously we remember the hits. We don't remember all the shows that she was in that didn't work.
So true. And actually brings up an interesting point we were talking about amongst our New Day crew about how she's actually called the first lady of game shows. And you realize that kind of, throughout the 60s, that was her claim to fame. She was on all the game shows.
Yes, that's interesting. You're right. Talk about pivoting. Also, just having fun with whatever she was doing, seizing whatever opportunity came her way. And as far as game shows, in interviews, she has said, I love playing games. I get to be paid to play games with my best friends, who were some of the people appearing with her on Hollywood Squares or Match Game or all those shows.
What was your favorite Betty White character?
Well, it's funny because as a little girl, I mean, she was already an old lady as far as I saw it. Of course, now I'm the same age she was when she started on the Golden Girls.
That always blows my mind anyway.
So I agree. That is funny. But growing up, I pretty much knew her from the Golden Girls. And later I discovered her from Mary Tyler Moore and all the other shows. But I would say Rose on the Golden Girl. Who doesn't love Rose? She's just so lovably naive, but also really strangely knowing. Like she's so perceptive.
So perceptive and just, I mean, she is that great character that almost is kind of like in mythical terms. I always had these great things to share about St. Olaf.
Totally, yes.
I do remember her on MTM. That was one of my favorite shows growing up, on Nick at Night.
Yes.
But I have to say, my favorite character of hers was on Lake Placid. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, I did. Oh, fun. Yeah, that was a fun.
Just phenomenal. Like only she could pull off someone who fed her husband to an alligator. Am I right?
And somehow she's still lovable, right? Because it's Betty White.
Yes.
That actually, it's interesting you pointed out that movie, because that really was sort of the beginning of her, return, not exactly return. She never went away, but where younger people started recognizing her. And that, of course, sort of culminated in her being the oldest host ever on Saturday Night Live.
Hosting Saturday Night Live.
And then doing that Snickers ad that went viral. So it's pretty unusual to be in your 80s at that point, as she was, to be, a huge star.
I feel like the way that we age now has changed. What can we learn from her?
The funny thing is when people ask, of course, people always ask her for advice. And she always says, I'm sure it's tongue in cheek, which is her way, but she always says, drink vodka and eat hot dogs, which of course, for audiences listening, not good advice. Don't do that.
We cannot advise that as a healthy form of nutrition.
We don't advise that. But really for her, I think animals keep her active. She's always loved animals. That keeps her busy. I think really the fact that she's always involved with things, not just show business, but with these philanthropic organizations to support animals.
Man, that Betty White, national treasure, I tell you.